Unfortunately, it's really easy to make silly mistakes when you're doing calculations, but fortunately, sometimes these mistakes are really easy to see as long as you incorporate a reasonableness check or like an RC whenever you're doing calculations. I highly recommend, and for my students will require, that you actually just like kind of make this part of your routine, that whenever you're doing a calculation, you check at the end to see at least, maybe I don't want to go and check all of the single decimal points and maybe rounding errors and this sort of thing. But if I can at least kind of get a qualitative sense, like, does my answer make sense? Like, if I'm adding an acid, my proton concentration should go up and my pH should go down. If I get an answer that doesn't have that, well, then I did something wrong. If I added a base, well, that proton concentration should go down, my pH should go up. If I get a pH that's lower, well, then I did something wrong, and then I can redo. And similarly, if I'm doing some sort of thermodynamics, well, if something's favorable, then our delta G should be negative, and our KEQ should be greater than 1. But if it's the opposite, if it's non-favorable, well, then my delta G should be positive, and my KEQ should be less than 1. So by doing these simple, rational reasonableness checks at the end, you're then able to save yourself time or save yourself, getting a wrong grade by submitting an answer that is not actually reasonable. And so before you do an equation, before you do any sort of calculation, just think about, in general terms, what would you expect your answer to be? Would you expect that to be pH lower, pH higher? Would you expect it to be a negative or a positive? If you're near the pKa, you wouldn't expect something to change too much if you're adding something to a buffer, but if you're far away, you'd expect it to change a lot. So kind of gather this kind of sense about what these equations actually represent. They're not just formulas that you plug and chug in. They're actually representing what's actually happening at the molecular level. And so if you can think like that, if you think about what these equations are actually telling you, what's going into them, what should come out of them, then kind of come up with an expectation before you do the question. Then go ahead and do the question, and then do a reasonableness check. So I'm actually in my answer keys and stuff, I just incorporate an RC, reasonableness check. Does this answer make sense? And I hope that I want my students to do the same. They're going to put in a reasonableness check when they give calculations as well, because it's so important to be able to kind of gather this sense of what you're doing, as well as check yourself for if you're making those silly mistakes. So things like flipping a plus for a minus, often those errors are really easy to catch. But if you're just doing a plug and chug and you're not really looking at what your answers are, you're just saying, okay, well, my calculator spit out this number and putting that in, well, now you're not going to be able to kind of recognize that your answer doesn't make sense. But if you formally just incorporate, yes, I've got to check my reasonableness, then you can see oh, maybe I did something wrong. And so I do this myself, when I'm answering all these, doing all these pH calculations and this sort of thing, sometimes I make a mistake, yeah. But then I'm able to see, oh wait, that answer doesn't make sense. Let me look and see what I did wrong. And then I catch what I did wrong, I fix it, and voila. So it's not all about being perfect. A lot of science is not being perfect. There's a lot of easy ways to make silly mistakes, and things just rounding errors and stuff like that. Those are less important. It's actually being able to detect these big changes, that answer doesn't even make sense. That's what's really important. So you want to develop that sense of your importantness of what you expect. Do those calculations, see if it meets your expectations. If not, go back and check your work. So hope that this strategy works for you. It's just really good to kind of get into that habit of doing.